Hi, everyone. Welcome to American Libraries Live. We're happy to have you here for our March episode. We're going to be talking about ebooks and audiobooks. And before we begin, I want to just extend a special thanks to Odillo, our sponsor for today's episode. Sponsorships from companies like Odillo help us bring you these free webcasts, so we can't say how much we appreciate their sponsorship today and their help with bringing our wonderful panel today. Speaking of which, let me introduce our panel. First, I want to start with Jamie LaRue. Welcome, Jamie.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Jamie. Jamie is going to be our moderator today. He's the director of the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom and the Freedom to Read Foundation, so he's just right upstairs from me. Next, I want to welcome Jim Pletz. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, how you doing, Dan?
Doing very well. Glad to have you here. Jim is the executive director of the Library Network Consortia in Michigan. I want to introduce Veranda Pitchford. Welcome, Veranda.
Hello. Hi, ebook friends.
Glad to have you here. Veranda's the program director for eRead Illinois, which is a statewide shared ebook collection here in Illinois on the Access 360 platform. And she's the director of membership development and resource sharing at Rails, which is a consortium here in the Chicago area. And finally, I want to introduce Mark Eaton. Welcome, Mark.
Good afternoon.
Glad to have you here, and Mark is the Director of Sales for Odillo for North America and for Australia. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Jamie, and he will get started. Actually, before I do that, sorry, I just want to remind our audience that you are part of the conversation. There's a chat space on our webpage. There's a Twitter feed, AL Live, so if you have questions, comments, concerns that you want me to feed to the panel, please don't be shy. The more we all chat, the better the event will be, the more interactive it'll be. So don't hold back with your questions, comments, or chats. With that, I'm going to turn things over to Jamie, and he will get started. Thanks, Jamie.
Okay, well, thank you, Dan, and thank you, panelists. I'll kind of start by talking about what I think is the big issues that we've faced around ebooks. So everybody knows there's been, since about 2012 or so, an extraordinary explosion of digital content. So ebooks just first took off, and it was at first the mainstream players and the big five weren't selling all of their titles to us. That has largely been resolved. But we continue to have some other problems. So again, the new content that's coming out is a tremendous number of new players, independent and regional publishers, small publishers now getting their books out faster and at greater volume. Next, we have an even greater explosion of self-published content. At this point, if we have 300,000 mainstream publications that come out every year, there are now 550,000 new titles that are self-published. And, lest you believe that all of this is no good, a couple of years ago, 16% of the New York Times bestsellers were self-published. Some of the biggest, most successful books in recent memory, 50 Shades of Grey, whatever you think of it, started as fan fiction, self-published. The Martian, quite a marvelous book, was self-published and then made it big. So that's something that we really have to watch. But the business problems that remain, I think, are still, first, the question of ownership. What happens when you sign up with an e-content vendor who says you don't own these things, and even if I change my business practices and you want to separate from us, you don't get to keep the content. So that's a new issue for libraries for books, not so much for journals. The second one is the price. It seems intuitively like the e-book should be cheaper for libraries to buy because you don't have a physical item to move or to process. And yet, many of us are paying more for ebooks than we paid for paper. And I think that's one of the reasons that we've seen some recent decline in the popularity of ebooks, that they're expensive and they're hard to use. And the third one is integration. So originally, when the ebook came along, we were looking at separate independent silos, and we now understand that if we're going to make it easy to find this new content, it has to be deeply embedded in our ILS. We have to figure out a way to make it more discoverable and easier to find. So I'm going to now, with that very brief introduction, kind of jump over to some of our panelists. And Jim, I wonder if you can start from the Library Network. How did you get into this? What are you learning? What's the state of the state?
It's all your fault.
Oh, sorry about that.
Well, no, actually, I'm very, very pleased that we did attend and sponsor a workshop in Chicago on physical delivery of material, but e-content that you talked about when you were at Douglas County Library was very critical because we're finding that not having ownership became a critical issue with portability of your collection. Without ownership, you ended up having what amounts to nothing more than a highly expensive subscription service. But we didn't have the money in Michigan that you all must have had in Colorado. So we kind of moved ahead and plotted about until we got hooked up with the Odello folks. And with Odello, I do things over a 3-year period on special projects, and working with the Odello staff, what we did was we decided we would sell our member libraries on the idea of expanding their e-content platform, and specifically an ownership platform. In doing that, I was too good a salesman. I only had 20 libraries in mind. When we first did this with another platform about 5 years earlier, we were asked to get 10 libraries. We got 9, so we cheated by 1. So I figured, okay, we'll double that this number of years later to 20. We ended up with 40.
Wow.
Why? Because I paid the subscription cost, we paid the POP. The only cost to our member libraries was the cost of circulation, which they priced at a very reasonable rate. And if they decided to do an Advantage account where they only had access to what they purchased, they could purchase in that respect. Well, we had 40. That's great. But they were all big, medium, and small libraries because that's what co-ops and systems and consortia do. They serve across the spectrum of both special and regular libraries. And what we found there, quite simply, was the small ones would not do an Advantage account, so I needed to do a collection. Great. I gave the e-content committee, all sorts of good committees here, the right to select up to $20,000 worth of eBooks. I figured that they'd be hot on the trail and doing wonderful things with selection. No. I went to a midwinter conference. Nothing had, well, actually 5 books have been selected. I made it quite clear that we would buy whatever needed to be purchased when I returned from vacation in February from Florida. Well, I got back, they hadn't bought a dang thing. I did it in 3 days. Now they have a collection. Democracy is wonderful unless you have people who want to do procedures first and substance second. And that's what we ended up having was procedural versus substance. We're also, because of consortia constraints, I can't dictate what ILS my consortia members will have. There are any number of ILSs, the integration between the ILSs, quite frankly, the sales staff on exhibit floors will tell you there's wonderful integration. Crap. As late as Boston, I had to go to each of our integrated library system vendors, the main players, and say, would you please hustle over to the Odello booth and see what you can do to integrate through NCEPT or whatever you nuts do, some kind of happiness so I can get access through my LS to this system. Yeah. One of the vendors said, who's Odello? I said, they're right behind your booth. So they didn't have that communication. I think that's the next problem that we found, is that there's no real cross-integration. So Odello was very happy with me because what we did was send the major integrated library system vendors over to them to start tasking out how to do this approach. Too many promises, not enough delivery. But we're moving ahead. Like I said, I gave them 3 years to do this. We're a year and a half into it. We're beginning to see some of our member libraries that would like nothing to do with us do a lot with us with Odello. So I thank you guys at Odello. Jamie, I thank you for the vision, and I thank the entire approach to taking what amounts to saying, okay, publishers, you really can't play unfair just because you have a new format of material that you're using.
Well, I'll come back to that, but I want to ask you something before then. So you say that you managed to do this big task of selection in the space of just a few days. How did you do that? I mean, talk it through.
Well, I went to the catalog and started selecting. My knowledge of authors is fairly reasonable. I ran adult services when I was in Chicago, so we used to do a lot of selection for book clubs. So I knew a good range of authors. And we started working through and finding authors that we knew would be popular, then also looking at genres. But I have a sneaking suspicion that I'm not by myself on an acquisitions platform. I feel strongly that about 80% of all acquisition is the same nationally. It's that 10 to 20% that's local and customized. So it wasn't hard to do a, quote, national collection. How do I know that? We have a shared service collection of 5 million items. Only 1 million are unique. Seems to me that that's the 80-20 figure right there.
That's right.
So I really did use basic common sense and go through the selection process.
Okay, interesting. Well, if I may, I'm going to jump over to Veranda here. So tell us what's happening with the program at Rails, and tell us, you might also address that process of how do you build a collection with ebooks? What's different?
Thanks, Jamie. I guess the first thing I would say is I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation, and I do hope we keep it going virtually through the Twitter feed that Dan's managing, so we can engage around these issues. I really think it's important for us to come together as an industry to talk back to publishing, to talk back to vendors, to really get the terms and the resources we need to better serve our communities. In terms of building a collection, I think we have eRead Illinois on the Access 360 platform, serving over 400 libraries across the state. And we centralize collection development as well, which speaks to the power of resource sharing. That tends to be a lot of major titles available to us through Baker and Taylor, but what we're focused on now is how can we leverage that local library expertise to point people to the next thing. It kind of put us in, not competition, but on par with the retail market, using that expertise we already have. Mm-hmm. We have a program here in Illinois called Soon to Be Famous, and it's a way to uncover the next best self-published author and have librarians make that person famous. And it's in its third year now, and we should have an announcement soon. But those are some of the ways I think that we can work together to do that.
So, Veranda, do you think that 80-20 rule is going to change now that the publishing dynamics are changing?
I definitely think it is. It's kind of that recent article that I saw on the Reader's First blog of how ebook sales are down. I'm sure everybody saw that. But really that was in reference to the Big Five more so than anything else. So I think it's changing. Things are changing, and much like capitalism allows, gives an opportunity for the next thing to come in.
Yeah. I wonder if you could address the topic of new content. Do you see anything that's new that that is not part of the traditional market? Any new features in the ebooks that you're picking up?
You mean in terms of authors, or more so in terms of the experience? I see there's some great new stuff going on. When you spoke to, I love how you distilled those kind of three key issues of ownership, price, and integration. The integration is a big piece that we're working on. You know, I often wonder, with our members, we have about 1,300 members in our consortium, and we often hear from librarians that patrons suffer from what I call platform fatigue.
Yeah.
Because they're using a different experience on different platforms. And, there's resources like Simply E, formerly Library Simplified, that are getting at that seamless access similar to the retail market that's new and coming to kind of alleviate that. And also, again, as I mentioned before, the work Readers First is doing to push vendors to give us that kind of seamless access that I mentioned before.
Yeah, I think that's right. My read on the Library Simplified is, again, very much it's all about integration, which means first we have to be able to talk the language of APIs, right? We have to make sure that people actually get this. And in fact, I remember, we'll get to you here in a second, Mark, but I remember talking to some folks in Australia, and they said they don't use ILS to mean the same thing because there's nothing integrated about it.
Oh, wow.
And the APIs are pretty critical as well, because many of the ILS vendors are charging for those APIs.
Wow.
And I think that's one of the other additional barriers. We hear this bandied about so often that NCEP will integrate ILSs. It ain't happening. But I think the one nice thing that we have is you're seeing a push at the very local level, not only self-published authors, but even small university and college presses, and that's real critical to community development and community awareness as these communities move forward.
Yeah. So
can I say one more thing, Jamie?
Absolutely.
And again, and it's so great that we have a consortial representation here, because the great project that Jim is Jim has started speaks to how we can come together, and that makes us a more powerful voice in working with our partners, because it does require this kind of pushing back on APIs requires us to be a partner at the table as vendors and publishers develop these terms and new models, because we're the ones who are receiving them. So I really think this kind of convening this voice and forums like this is the next step to doing it. I am very interested in an ebook revolution.
So am I. Okay, well, I like that very much. I'm going to come back to this idea, Mark, to put you on point, to talk about what you actually have to do to make these APIs work. But before I leave, Veranda and Jim, and I'll come back to you many times, I'm sure. What have you found from the publishers when you say we are going to be sharing this ebook content consortially? Are you getting much pushback from them? Was that a new point for negotiation?
I'm happy to speak to that, Jim. Did you
Please
want
do.
me? Well, we started our program in 2013, and at that point, these models from publishers, for better or for worse, are such a moving target and change almost. It's really like follow the bouncing ball, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So initially, at that time, there were the restrictions placed on library, and Jim could speak to this as well. There were additional restrictions placed on consortia in terms of availability. I have to say, Baker & Taylor was a great partner to us as we built the shared collection. Their publisher relations department went back to publishers on our behalf. Now, I'll tell you, we had to answer quite a few questions. I felt like I was trying to get into another country here to demonstrate how these would be used, what would this mean. And I really think it's a myth, in my opinion, the idea that kind of wider sharing of the ebooks leads to less sales. That's my intuition of the thought around it. If we were at the table working together, our wider sharing and exposure of new authors could impact sales for them.
Well, in fact, I want to kind of jump on that and say that I think there's a lot of data that absolutely supports
Definitely.
that. The big question in the 21st century is that if we've gone from 300,000 titles a year to over 1.5 million, how do you get noticed as an author? And the answer is the more people have it and the more people share it, the more people know that you're out there, and you're more likely to get sales. So
and the more libraries that are spreading the word. I think the library is the next discovery platform for Indian self-published content. You heard it here first.
Yeah, it really is the fact that authors will retain ownership more of their content than in the past.
Yes.
By having content ownership, they will in the long run move the publishing industry off this kind of high and mighty approach to how we do things. I remember that 26 circs in a year was one of the maxes. But if we take a look at print collections, that's actually not a bad number. I mean, how many items do you circulate that have 26 circs in a year?
Yeah.
That's pretty high.
Yeah. But for print, by the time you get to the 26, there's probably another 26 left in them.
Yeah.
So that the reason we wind up getting rid of some of those is because they've peaked in popularity and we need to make room for more books on our shelves, and that's not true for ebooks. So this is my good transition to get over to Mark, who's been waiting very patiently. So Mark, I know that many librarians have gotten angry at distributors, angry at publishers because of the multiple licenses, the weird pricing. But you're kind of in the middle of this, right? The distributor isn't setting the price. That's being set by the publisher. So you might talk a little bit about that first question of how has that been to negotiate these deals with publishers, and what do you see the differences between the big five and this emerging market? And then the second one is to come back to that notion of doing integration so that the content becomes discoverable.
Well, I hate to say it's a cop-out, but thankfully that's not my job to negotiate that part, because I know it's not an easy job at all. It's something that I hear on a daily basis. Libraries are really struggling with budgets and trying to maintain large ebook collections with the prices that are out there today. I can speak at least for Odillo in that we really are working hard with our publishers that we work with today to offer more than just that traditional loan model. I think everyone would agree probably the two biggest dislikes within the ebook world are price, and then that traditional one copy, one user model, simply because people want that bestseller now, or they don't want to wait 2-3 weeks to check out a title that they need at the moment. So at Odillo, we are trying to work hard with our publishers. We've expanded our lending models. We don't do just traditional loan. We do pay-per-use, which is extremely popular, especially when it comes to foreign language content. Libraries are trying to serve a very diverse community. Obviously, Spanish is the largest minority in the U.S., and there's not a lot of good quality native content. And so the foreign language publishers are really open to this pay-per-use format, and so we're really starting to see people say, God, we really need to serve this 5, 10, 30, 50% segment of our community. And we're seeing English publishers start to come that way as well, which is really exciting that we're moving past that traditional loan. As well as with subscription model and simultaneous access. So, every publisher that we bring on, we ask them to consider all models, and we really try to get them to do more than just that one traditional model. And it is going to be a slower process with some of the bigger publishers, and we hope that some of them will try betas with us or with other ebook providers to see if it really is going to hurt the bottom line at the end of the day. And time will tell, but slowly but surely, I think we're going to chip away at that.
So I can remember reading, I think there's now been 3 or 4 different studies that say for every 2 ebooks that people borrow, they buy one of them. And so I remember when this first came out, there was sort of the publisher pushing this idea that libraries were cannibalizing sales. And I'm with Veranda. I think we're making sales. Are you hearing publishers, are they eager to get their books in libraries now, or have they begun to relax a little bit from this idea that we're stealing things from them?
I think they've definitely relaxed. I think, again, if you look at how many more are now expanding beyond that traditional loan, they're seeing that it is not going to cannibalize their business. It is going to open it up to new people. I think the traditional loan, as a way to at least to start into the library world, shows them that people will start to go out and buy the title. If they can't finish it in the 21 days and now they've got to wait 2 months to get it, they're not going to want to wait that time period to get it again. But I think that over time they're going to see that even expanding it to a multiple lending model, whether it be 2 people that can check it out at a time or unlimited, that it's just going to increase the thirst for content from that author, from that publisher, whatever that might be.
Okay. You also support, so that means that you must have to support, as a vendor or distributor, this idea of managing multiple licenses. Mm-hmm. So how many active license models are out there right now?
Well, with Odillo, there's the 4. There is that traditional loan, there's the pay-per-use, simultaneous access, and subscription. So you can do multiple lending models based on the needs of your community. There are libraries that are doing pay-per-use for perhaps their foreign language content right now, and then they're supplementing it with traditional loan for those publishers that don't offer it, or for the big 5 who again are kind of sticking to that one copy, one user. But that's what's so great is that you can blend multiple models, and if you see a pay-per-use title start to trend really well, you can move that to a traditional loan so that you're saving money for your budget, and that's so important. At the end of the day, we're all trying to protect our budget, getting the most content that we can, the biggest bang for our buck, and that's what's so great about blending these various license models together.
So let's take this back to Jim and Veranda. So what about the other side? So now you as a library acquisition person are managing multiple licenses. Talk about the new kinds of work that are necessary to keep that operation going.
You almost need a Boston lawyer to work with them. And I think we're always cognizant of it. We're walking on eggs, that we don't want to overstep our bounds. But both of us have consortia. Publishers looking at memberships of in excess of 400 plus libraries, or 1,000 plus in Illinois, have a variety of different approaches. What we have found is the true model of a consortia works nicely with ebook collections, because the very small, medium, and large can all work and coalesce with each other, but you kind of spread that cost across the line.
Yeah.
And by doing that, just as with e-content when you're working with magazines now, I don't see ebooks replacing print books anytime soon. But we certainly are seeing e-content begin to replace what we used to see in traditional library settings of your periodical and your newspaper collection.
Sure.
That's critical. But one of the unseen advantages and displacements of using e-content is the ability for our older population to actually scale their fonts. So large type publishers are basically dinosaurs, or they're not doing a very big market.
Right.
Further, the national and international model for recorded books is fast approaching what the National Library Service said would happen, and they would be out of business, which is if it's readily available for our population with visual disabilities through recorded formats nationally, we will be out of business. And that's beginning to happen.
So that's true disruption. Baranda,
Yeah.
what do you think? What's the collection development side of this? And then let's come back to that notion of recorded books.
First of all, I hope you can still see me. One thing I did anticipate is, since I'm not moving in my office, the lights went out. But I think you can still see me.
Yes, we can.
One thing that I would say, to go back to Jim's point regarding the consortial role, libraries are on the pulse of their communities and know what their communities need and read. I look to us at the consortial level to handle that back end of managing those licenses, dealing with vendors, advocating for them on a national level, kind of working across consortia across the country to help them get what those readers need and lead in their hands. So that's how I see that playing out.
Okay, interesting. Well, I want to ask Mark this one. So tell me about your statistics. What kind of information do you gather about the popularity of formats? And the ones I'm particularly interested in would be ebook versus recorded book.
Yeah, well, e-audio is something newer for us. We recently added 45,000 e-audio titles, but we see e-audio really starting to trend upward and be something that libraries are wanting to add, again, in multiple languages. Everyone is on the go now. We all have a smartphone, no matter what nationality or ethnicity you are. We've got our tablets, and we want to be able to listen to that as we're on our way to class if we're a student, or while we're sitting in the car via our Bluetooth, whatever that might be, on our way to work. And the fact that we don't have the time always to sit for 3 hours straight and to read a book like we used to, e-audio, we're definitely seeing trend up more and more as a result of just life on the go.
And so do you have some way to integrate that experience? So let's say I wake up in the morning and I'm reading a book on my tablet, and then I'm driving to work and I want to listen to it on e-audio, and then I want to pick it up at my lunch hour and read it as a book again. Are you seeing any convergence of these different formats to give one seamless reading experience?
We're not seeing a ton of that at this moment. People are still tending to stick to whatever device that is. We're seeing ebook reading even on smartphones, because smartphones keep getting bigger and bigger until Apple goes smaller in a week or two. But we're trending upward, and so people just seem to really stick with whatever that device is that they're using, because we have our phone with us. I mean, as we go to sleep, it's still in our hand. That blue light's keeping us awake. I think people are still tending to continue with whatever device they start with and kind of continuing that wherever they go.
Okay. Jim, what are your thoughts about e-audio?
Again, I come from the background of having run a library for the blind, and I remember non-patrons wondering when they could get access to such wonderful reading material that's read to them in content that's well done. I sense that this is a trend that will continue to go up instead of down. The popularity of having the ability to do multitasking is very important in our society, and having a book read to you as you're doing driving or whatever else you do when you're in a car or in an airplane or whatever, that is important, and it's really manifest in what we're seeing with such rapid downloadable content of movies, television series, and everything else. We're just trending with everyone else, quite frankly.
Interesting. Rhonda, how about you? Anything else about the e-audio world?
Well, I was going to say the same thing. I just tweeted, the e-audio is the key to universal access in terms of library materials, because obviously it's available to everyone. I am in love, Jamie, with what you just said about the ability to read across format the same
Yeah,
book
yeah.
and the integration of that, because I could see that coming as well. I was just talking to a friend who checked out both formats so that he could switch back and forth
Hmm.
as his day, as he goes through his day or his week or his life. So I think that's the next thing in terms of, I mean, you said it first, but I think that's the next thing, like one checkout that allows me to work across formats. That would be ideal.
And to kind of shift things here a little bit to like this idea of new content, I have been dismayed by the fact that many of the big e-publishers don't offer much that's at variance from what I get from just a piece of paper. Like I'm just reading flat text. There's not much that's embedded in there. And I've talked to some of the children's publishers who are doing wonderful things where, you go along and you say, so the character has just met heard an odd sound in the night, click here to listen to it. Or, so-and-so Mary's having trouble with her boyfriend, click here to go to her Facebook page to give her some advice. And so that idea about integrating this content, I'm not seeing a lot of experiments with that, and I wonder if any of you are.
I would say a couple of communities that I'm seeing that with is I see museums do that well in terms of that kind of integration, in terms of kind of bringing collections alive through a book, or an
Yeah,
ebook, so to
yeah.
speak. I've seen that quite a few times and purchased a few of those. And through the democracy, what I call the democracy of the internet, I've seen that more in terms of like individuals or self-published folks doing that more so than it being industry-led. And again, to go and be able to tweet that author, to kind of check on the tweets of that character or something like that and tweet them back is really would be that kind of interaction and engagement would bring us deeper into the book. So, and their sales.
Yeah,
Mark,
and
go ahead.
I think it's a great idea. I just fear that pricing has to be appropriate for libraries and the layperson to afford, because when you talk about extra technologies, it adds to the cost, and I think that's maybe why we haven't seen that take off as well. And so hopefully we are able to see that integration that you and Veranda are talking about become more commonplace, but it has to be, in order for it to take off, it has to be affordable for libraries and for the layperson as well.
I don't know. As I look at like the EPUB format, it's not that difficult to embed a link. And if you have server space somewhere else and the sound file lives there, or the video lives there, or the website lives there, not that difficult. And so that kind of lets me shift over to maybe my next point. So that's what can or should libraries do to promote ebook use? So part of it is, of course, advocating for this coalition rights, for getting better APIs, for trying to drive the price down, to be more experimental. But what can we do to help people discover these new independent publishers and self-published authors when they're not part of our review process at present?
I think
How do we help people discover the books?
Jamie, one of the keys there is to integrate into standard, ongoing, accepted library programs. For example, doing an ebook expansive book discussion or book club would be one. I see a potential of ESL, English as a Second Language, as well as literacy, of integrating both the electronic and the print together, because we have different learning formats that we approach. But I really truly believe that as we see more integration into traditional library services and programs, the entire e-commerce field, that there will be that magnificent jump in usage that will then give us the negotiating power again, magnified by real use on an ongoing basis in your public library setting.
Okay, I love that. That's very clear advice for libraries. Kind of back to the distributor level, Mark, what do you see as ways that you, or in cooperation with us, we can push these materials in ways that people can find them?
Absolutely. Well, with Odillo, it's a very flexible platform, for example. So you can bring content onto the platform and to help promote things from the community, whether it be local authors, local musicians, programming that you video at the library. All different sorts of content can be uploaded into the Odillo platform, and that's important because once again, like you said, you want to get the word out. But it's not just putting it onto a platform. It's also making sure that it's easily visible and discoverable on the website. I spent 12 and a half years with Cengage Learning, and I spent the last 6 years working with libraries to make sure their content is discoverable. And today it's still not always easy to find out where ebooks are located.
Right.
Everyone's using different terminology. It's buried sometimes under 3 to 4 links, and it's got to be 1 click, maybe 2 clicks at most to get to that content. It's about putting things on the home page and highlighting certain things. So for National Cookbook, if you've got a local author who wrote a cookbook, highlight that and get that content and link directly to it. It's making sure that it's in your catalog as well as within the individual platform. There are so many different things that we can do, along with PR, using your PR department if you have one, to get the word out. We really need to make sure that it's everywhere that our patrons are or students are to be able to see what's available.
And I was surprised that you didn't talk more about like the store component that you have, because I was very impressed by that. Kind of this goes back to what Jim was saying. So if you're trying to say, I need to build up a collection as rapidly as possible to just start meeting that demand, and I think we've lost a lot of patrons because we just didn't have enough stuff to hold their interest. They had to wait too long for it. But I could go to the Odillo platform and say, I'm interested in materials in Spanish language, and there's a whole collection that I can do 1 click and I've got it all. So I keep thinking we could do that with independent publishers. We could do that with self-published authors to say a couple of consortia put together some best picks. We put it out there, and every library across the country says, I'll take it because they're popular and they're vetted.
Absolutely. The unlimited use component, whether it be local or these other models of pay per use and simultaneous and subscription, is so important because, again, people don't want to wait anymore. We live in an instant gratification society. Years ago, if you had a question, a trivia question, you had to answer, it took you like a day or two to get a response, and now it's right on your phone, and we have to get it right then and there.
Exactly.
People are the same way when it comes to e-content, and so that is, like you said, that is a great way to get to it quickly and efficiently.
So, Veranda, what do you think? What should libraries be doing to push this content?
Well, first of all, I like to go back to 50 Shades of Grey for a minute.
I knew you would.
One thing that I wanted to talk about is we talk about just serving emerging majorities, such as Spanish-speaking population across the U.S. It's important that we just don't have translated U.S. content.
That's right.
Everybody wants to read their own experience.
Yes.
As well as other things. But the opportunity to serve people with the content that represents their experience and not just translated American content is invaluable and puts a library heads above a lot of retail markets.
Well, and I think the thing that's interesting about that is that it's a globalization at the same time that it's personalization. And so, as you say, instead of buying from 1 or 2 distributors of Spanish language materials in the United States, now we can buy them from Spain. We can buy them from Brazil.
Exactly. Back to the question. I'm sorry.
I wanted to jump in with a couple of audience questions because I've been sitting on the. You guys have been so back and forth. Your conversation's been so vibrant. I've been trying to find a place to jump in here. But our first question is, can you talk about what libraries can do to promote ebook use, especially self-publishers and indie publishers?
Okay. All right. Well, everybody want to take another swing at that? Veronica, we'll come right back to you. To promote that new content, what would you suggest?
Well, I really think that, first of all, there's 2 pieces of that in my mind. It's the engagement of the self-published authors as well as engagement of the community in reading them. I think there's a real place, first of all, the first piece, for libraries to be a resource to those self-published authors on getting from the page to the stage, let's say. I just made that up. But so in terms of what formats do I publish in? What are the resources that are out there? And just as we have answered reference questions on other things, to be that piece. Just as people shop local, drink local, etc., we need them to read local. And I think positioning those authors in that way is the first step in that, to kind of hype that hyper-localized movement. Not to plug it one more time, but that soon-to-be famous model, which you can find at soon-to-be-famous.info, and I'll tweet that, is something that can be replicated in other states. It publicizes who the authors are that are out there, and it also lets people know that your library is committed to that. You know, there's other resources such as LJ's Selfie program as well, etc. So.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's very good. Mark.
Jamie, if I can just add on to that, because and I think James actually mentioned something earlier about as well, is with book clubs. You know, that is a great way to get that local publisher out to the community. You know, there's so many libraries doing author series. I just talked to one today that has like a monthly author series. And, you know, Odillo has a new ebook club that we're trying to tell people to use that for getting out to the community. You know, not everyone, again, has time to be face-to-face. They can't be there at the library at 7 p.m. tonight to hear that author. So it's a great way to have an author be a moderator of a book club, engage with people no matter where they are, whenever they want to, and then get the feedback as an author to be able to become a better author. You know, you get to see what's resonating with the people who are reading your book. And it's something that's mutually beneficial both for the author and for the community, and just, again, another way to get it out to the community as a whole.
Yeah, one of the things I used to talk about was at Douglas County we had this blog, and on the front page it said, "Do you want to write a book?" And we've learned that 99% of the human race will click that link because they do want to write a book. And then it says, "Do you want to write a good one?" And so that kind of guides you to say, okay, well, we've got workshops where we'll be talking about writing a book. We're going to be bringing in published authors. We're going to be talking about editing and finding a cover for it. And here's where you go to find other writers' groups for support. And so I think, Veranda, you're quite right. If we can step in as players in this space to say we're reaching out to the community and our programming touches them and we're trying to build them up, that's one way to get that dialogue. So, Jim, back to you.
The nice thing about that, Jamie, is you're reaching out electronically. So the breaking down of the barriers is very simple. We're already broken down. We've gotten outside of our walls, outside of our traditional barriers, and we're providing a new mixing board for how to get dialogue with growing populations that may or may not come to the library. But they can use this electronic format and access it and move forward positively.
You know, one of the things.
I will say one thing, though.
Go ahead.
I did find with one particular ethnic community that they did like American translations into their language, because we had bought almost a whole range of fiction for the Russian population, and they hated it. They wanted to have Danielle Steele and Gresham and all the others. And if you've ever seen the book covers of Russian titles, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Oh, that's fascinating. So what have we learned collectively about ways to get rich enough content? You know, for instance, it's one thing to say we really want to have this self-published content, but how do you get it? Where do you get it from? So what sources have you folks discovered for reliable, large collections of good content?
Local history collections and local history societies will provide you some of the best access to not only contemporary histories of your local community, but going back in time.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
I was just going to say we're just embarking on a project with a group here in Chicago called the Independent Publishers Group, who, you know, they rep over, I say it like they're a tiny little thing, but they rep over about 400 publishers internationally. And I've seen some really unique content that needs just to become more discoverable in terms of, for example, they have the first cookbook that included chocolate. Recipes for chocolate. They're reprinting that. They've reprinted that as an ebook. And how easy, as Jim talked about, would it be to connect that to programming?
Right.
And so really taking a more active role as a library, and in our case, as a consortium, to connect our members, to help them connect their communities to new content. So I just use that as an example. We're doing that find how we could do some kind of a simultaneous use around that to demonstrate how library as a discovery platform can impact retail sales.
Ah, very good, very good. I want to mention one of the ones too that I've worked in the past with a group called Blue Ink Review, and what they do is they set up a review kind of process where they're constantly weeding through things, and they just have an approval program. And I'd say, any library that's thinking about this, just sign up with them and buy whatever they recommend. It might be 1 or 2 books per month, but you know that they're good, you know that they're vetted.
Otherwise,
I'm familiar with that. That's great.
Books raw. You're going to get
What's that?
something that you may not wish to have.
That's entirely possible.
You may wish to have it depending upon the audience.
And to kind of give a nod here to my new role here as an intellectual freedom, I've been predicting for a while that as you start getting self-published content that didn't go through an agent, that didn't go through an editor, that didn't go through a reviewer, you're going to get some things that are a little wilder than you've seen in the past. Exhibit A, 50 Shades of Grey, Veranda's favorite book, I know. Yeah, she loves that book. But it started as fan fiction. It turned into a self-published title, and so bam, now it becomes mainstream. And that shift in American reading tastes happened almost overnight, just because it had gone from instead of the lurid cover, it went to something that you could read tastefully and quietly on your Kindle, and nobody knew that you were reading it, right? So what do we do as library professionals when suddenly we start to get a lot of wild and wacky fringe content? How do we deal with that? Have you seen anything like that yet?
There's always a traditional fallback that most libraries have, which is the Dirty Books Committee.
The single most popular committee on any library?
Well, that, along with the Idiot Selection Committee, goes well. But who's going to pick this book for this discussion? We have bureaucratic processes in place that will protect you, but intellectual freedom is still critical. And as long as you have a good selection policy in place, then the off-base, wacky, whatever is just part of life. Look at contemporary society. Are we any different than a reflection of what we're seeing currently?
That's right. Libraries hold up a mirror to our society, and sometimes people get shocked by what they see there. That's the truth. But I agree with you. The notion of having some policies in place and then thinking that through when you've got new content. If it hasn't gone through a traditional selection process because you can't keep up with all these new books, well, then maybe you talk about that. And one of the things I really haven't heard yet is how can we solicit the involvement of our patrons in this process? By which I mean, we were talking before the session started, it's possible to reach out to your patrons and say, I notice, Mark, that you do a lot of reading of science fiction. How about if I send you one science fiction title every month from a local author, an independent author? Would you review it and put it up and talk about it? And so, how can we begin to activate our user base?
Again, working from book clubs, we actively engaged our patrons in the selection of the next year's titles. So I would surmise that if you're really beginning to actively engage both locally as well as region-wide, one way of doing that is to engage your active readers that are part of the discussion groups. Plus they buy in at the same time, which is highly critical.
Excellent. And I have to say, too, my reading habits have changed. I am now reading almost exclusively online, and I find that a lot of the titles I want I can't get from my library. So I'm starting to shift over to ways that are hard to track. And Jim, your notion is a good one. If I were to reach out to authors or to readers in the area and say, give me a list of people that you've discovered that we don't have, then I have an advocate for it. Any thoughts, too, about what's the role of staff in this? How can staff become advocates for new unknown content?
This is Veranda, and I think it goes back to that leveraging our expertise as librarians and pointing people. I mean, libraries are one of the most trusted resources in local government, if not the most trusted resource in local government. Yes. People trust what we point them to, and it is about expanding what's good about in self-published content and letting that shine, and even give the people what they want. Most importantly, if I'm not gonna. This is the last time I'll say 50 Shades of Grey today, but if they want 50 Shades of Grey, this is you know, that's what we're there to give them. This is what their tax dollars in a public library case are for, to give them what they want.
Okay. Dan, it looks like you had something to say.
I do. Yeah, we have another question from the audience, and this is funny because this actually gels with last month's episode of American Life. Someone asked, will RDA become the standard for cataloging ebooks? So just want to know if anyone has a comment on that.
Anybody want to weigh in?
Well,
RDA?
RDA, right.
Did that come from a librarian?
Almost certainly. Veranda, you got anything to say about that?
Yeah. As one of our director of IT says here, metadata is a love note to the future.
Ah, that's very nice.
So, I mean, enriching our records to make resources more discoverable, I'm all for that. I hope we need the participation of bisects so that those bisects come along with us. I think that is a big, frankly, the evolution of those bisects as Library of Congress subject headings evolved really needs to happen, because I think that's a big stumbling block right now for discoverability. And as we evolve, you know, the cataloging piece, but we need to bring those other industries with us, because, you know, it's kind of a shot in the dark otherwise. It's you know, we can't operate in a silo. I definitely am down with, who isn't down with RDA?
Right.
But we need to, those bisects need to evolve with it.
Well, I think you're right about that. So the RDA, I think, definitely emerging standard makes sense for things that are going through that metadata process. It also makes sense to take advantage of things that publishers are already creating to help bookstores market their works. That's the whole bisect thing. But Mark, I want to go back again to this idea about integration. So now I've got RDA and I've got bisect information, and I also want to find a way to capture user reviews and language. So talk about the difficulties maybe on the vendor side to say, so if I really want integration, and it turns out that, as I mentioned this earlier, that I follow Jim as a reviewer. I love his reviews as just a reader, and I want to make sure that the comments that he makes and the language he makes wind up being part of what's searchable in the catalog.
Yeah, you know, that's something that we're currently looking at. You know, right now you're able to do things such as add comments and ratings, but it's something that we're still trying to figure out what is the best way to get that content and that information out to, you know, the masses. You know, we spoke a little bit before about, you know, is it that you're able to take those best rated titles and then embed that into your own carousel on your webpage to get that out to the community. You know, we're discovering right now what is going to be the best way to take that content and then make it accessible to the masses, because you have all this great information that you're amassing over time from your community, and you want to make sure that it's discoverable just as your ebooks are discoverable. You want to be able to take that and, you know, I hate to use the word export, but export that out and make it you know, accessible on your website, or even taking it, maybe putting it on other sites that work with the library to expand the library's universe even further. It's something that's going to be evolving, and, you know, for Ardillo, it's something that we're really paying close attention to today. In regards to, you know, APIs and all those things we talked about earlier, you know, we've got the Simply E project that's going on right now to bring together disparate ebook platforms. You know, Ardillo has Ardillo Simplicity, which does a very similar thing. It takes disparate ebook platforms along with your ILS as well and brings it into one platform. And because there is that, you know, potential platform fatigue, as Veranda referenced earlier, or confusion that you want to try to, you know, avoid. And so things like Ardillo Simplicity and Simply E are going to be crucial as libraries find different benefits of various platforms.
I found myself really wanting to have something like, I would go into a catalog and fill out a profile to say I'm looking for these keywords and these subjects and these authors, and just and then when I go to the library catalog, I get my carousel, the one that just has the stuff that I love. With every 100th book, I want to be a total surprise, you know, because that's part of the serendipity of searching through a catalog, right? You never quite know what you're going to find.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Nope. Up to you.
No, I was going to say I completely agree with what you're saying. In fact, I just participated in a UX focus group, and I was saying that very thing. It's like, as I kind of pick my preferences, for example, with my New York Times subscription of what sections I want to see first and what do I want to see news from first, it's like, sure, I know I should say the national section, but really, I want to see the style section. So to refine my approach to specifically give me what I want and then a taste of something, what I need.
That's
is
really
how
good.
I look at it.
Yeah.
I think, Jamie, we know that we have become successful when authors and publishers begin writing their own reviews to promote their stuff.
Have you been to Amazon lately? So I'm guessing we're getting kind of close here. We got about 5 minutes left, so I want to give each of you this kind of shot. So if you had to do a shout out, and it can be to a publisher, it can be to a distributor, it can be to staff, it can be to your readers, it can be to authors. What's the one critical thing, what's the one message you would like to send out to the world in our last few minutes? Who wants to go first?
I'll go first.
Okay, I knew you would.
So when you say, I think we may have a difference of what we mean by shout out here. So you're saying something I want to say to them, not like,
Yes.
hey, okay.
Yes.
So first of all, I always want to give a shout out to librarians. But I will give my shout out to librarians in that we do not know our power. We do not know how much influence we could and should have on these industries and how we should be working together with vendors and publishers to create a better reading experience. We should be at the forefront of that. Not only should we be at the table, but we should be the voice that they listen to do the next thing. Just like I said, we know what these communities need and read. So just really, it's kind of like that Wizard of Oz. It was in you all along.
Mm-hmm.
And it is, but we take what we get instead of telling them what we want.
So librarians, wake up and unite. Okay.
Yes,
that's
right
really
on,
clear.
Jamie. Right on.
Okay. Okay. Who's next?
I'll run it, Jamie.
Okay.
I really want to first thank you for recognizing that monopolies and not having a say in a new field is very tiresome. You reached out and did something at Douglas County and it continued on and made a model where now libraries have some options that they didn't have in the past. And with options comes negotiability, with negotiations comes consortia and the whole worldwide approach to beginning to move this forward. And that, we congratulate you for your foresight in doing that. I just didn't have $1 million for an IT budget to do it on our own here in Michigan, but we should appreciate what Odell has picked up on as well. I've told all the vendors that we don't pick one over another. We're very democratic, and we like all of our vendors. So the shout out goes to them to participate with the leadership that you're showing as well.
Well, and I just underscore that I absolutely believe that you have a choice. We can be victims of the marketplace, or we can change the market. And so, Mark, last word to you.
Yeah.
I know we're just about 2 seconds out of here. One thing I'll say is to our publishing partners, we love having you on board, and we just want to continue to see new models offered to libraries to help them further. We're all in it for the same goal, is to help people find our content. So I know we're just about out of time. I do want to thank quickly Dan for moderating this, and I'm going to hand it back over in a second, but I want to thank Jamie and James and Veranda, you guys, for your excellent insights as thought leaders. I'm especially appreciative to be a part of this very esteemed panel here. And I just want to remind libraries, at the end of the day, you have a lot of options today when it comes to ebooks, and it is not what we could have said 5-10 years ago. So, when you're looking at things, and selfishly speaking, if you're looking for a more affordable, a more flexible, and a more powerful platform for serving not just your English speakers, but your diverse community, I encourage you guys to take a look at Odillo after Dan, back to you, my friend.
All right.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you so much to everybody. Thank you to Odillo for sponsoring today's event. Jamie, Jim, Mark, and Veranda, you guys have been fantastic. Thank you so much to our audience. There was a lot of great discussion going on in the chat space, and sorry we weren't able to get to all of your questions. But we hope we see you next month. We're going to be talking about how libraries are supporting non-traditional high school students. So please join us for that episode. And again, thanks to everyone. Have a great day.